Hello, you guys. This is Stephanie from Unveiling the Spirit, and today I wanted to tackle the question of did Africans really sell each other? I know that this is not necessarily a spiritual perspective on the issue, but a lot of the times what is embedded in the spirit is knowledge, and so always increasing your knowledge is a part of growing yourself spiritually. It's not all of it, but it's an essential part of it because you cannot grow your spirit without growing your knowledge. And so I want to answer this question, for that reason, and of course in connection with everything that's going on in America right now, but also because once a week I hold talks about racism in one of my Facebook Black Lives Matter Facebook groups. And the topic a couple of weeks ago was the truth about Africa and the slave trade, and this question came up. And so I wanted to answer the question on, make a recording answering the question also, because not only did I not expound in the group as much as I would have liked to on the answer, but I do think it's important for other people who did not attend the group to kind of have access to this information, because a lot of America's history, especially history concerning this slave trade, has been whitewashed, and people don't have a clear understanding about some of the things and even the mentalities that took place during that time. Um, One of the two things that I want to point out before I get into answering that question is that those who say this they often use it in justification for slavery to say that blacks sold each other. So I guess the inference is slavery was not that bad, and even if it was, Africans participated in it too, so we're all just as guilty. Now, while we are all guilty of something, wrong is wrong. It doesn't matter if Africans do it, if whites do it, if Asians do it, if Hispanics do it, if Native Americans do it. Wrong is wrong. It does not change depending on how close you are to the person that's being done wrong to, how far you are, who you are, where you are. Wrong is wrong. And so another thing that I want to touch on before I get into answering this question is this erroneous idea that all blacks are one people. And that's what this rebuttal insinuates, is that blacks are all one people. So if an African sold another African, he was selling his brother, and that's probably even worse than maybe a white person selling an African, because that wasn't our brother. And so, but it's built on this idea that all black people are one people, all Africans are one people, and that it could not be farther from the truth. All people that have white skin are not considered one people, and so I have always thought it was a bit ironic that all black people were considered one people. We have been made into one people because of racism. But in truth, there are over 3,000 ethnic groups in Africa. There's over 2,000 languages. Africa is not a country, it is a continent, and it is filled with people that have different customs, different ideas, different beliefs, different traditions, different culture. And so to lump all black people together simply because of the color of their skin is a form of racism in and of itself. Because Irish people and French people are not considered brothers, and they have, similar skin tone. Germans and Italians are not considered one people. They are identified by the groups that they associate with. And a lot of times, black people are not giving that same respect. And by lumping all black people together or all Africans together, you really deny and belittle the creativity, the culture, the advancements, the originality. You just dismiss a lot of things about African culture because we are all the same. And so that's the first thing that needs to be addressed with this ideology or with this thinking, is that black people are not all one people. And so that's really important to keep in mind as I answer this question, so you can get away from this idea that if African sold another African, he was selling his brother that came from the same womb and grew up in the same house. It's just an erroneous idea. And so anyway, and let me add to that really quickly, is that even a lot of the Africans that were taken during the slave trade were taken from West Africa. That's a whole section of a continent. So everybody that was taken from Africa did not speak the same language. They did not know each other. They were not around each other. They had different cultures. As a matter of fact, once they were brought over to the United States, when some Africans tried to connect with other Africans that did speak their language, this is part of the reason why Blacks were not allowed to speak their, or let me say Africans were not allowed to speak their language, and they had to learn English, and they were robbed of their own names or stripped of their own names to kind of chip away at their identity about where they came from. And so, but anyway, so back to the question. So did Africans sell each other? The answer is yes, they did. But it's not as simple as it sounds. Again, like I just mentioned, all Black people or all Africans during that time they were not one people. And so the first thing to understand in Africans selling each other is that there was a form of slavery that existed in Africa before the slave trade. As a matter of fact, slavery has always existed in humanity in some form or fashion for as long as, it's been documented or we have documentation. Before, the slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, slavery was kind of a part of the economy. And it was attributed more or was based more on classism and on your poverty level than it was about your race, your language, or anything like that. So if you were poor, you could find yourself in slavery or enslaved, and usually it was not lifelong. Lifelong slavery is called chattel slavery. I believe the connection with that is also hereditary, that your kids can also become slaves. That did not exist before the Atlantic slave trade. If you were poor and you were an indentured servant or a slave, that was usually for a period of time. And once that period of time ended, you were free. You were free to be who you were before or go about your way or whatever. You were not stripped of your name. You were not stripped of your identity. Your kids were not bound to slavery. You could, in a lot of cases, even get married as a slave. In Africa, they had different communities, and if you owed a debt to one community, you could send someone from your family to work for those people for a period of time. But once that period of time was over, those people were sometimes stayed in the communities because they had became so close with the people that they were around. They would marry, sometimes by property and things like that. So it was not so much of this dehumanizing aspect of it as it was with Atlantic slavery. Now, Atlantic slave trade. Now, don't get me wrong, slavery in itself is dehumanizing, but there are things about the Atlantic slave trade that were unique to the Atlantic slave trade, which is chattel slavery, lifelong slavery, and slavery being assigned to a group of people based on their skin color. That did not exist before then. And so the Africans that sold other Africans would have had this type of slavery more so in their mind than the type of slavery that was a lot of Africans' reality that got shipped over on the boats. And so not that that necessarily makes it any better, but it does give you an insight into their mentality of an African selling another African, which is problematic, but I already explained that. And so another thing about Africans selling each other is that a lot of these people that participated in the slave trade were considered criminals in the community. These were not upstanding members of the community. They were not wealthy members of the community. They were actually considered criminals and even ostracized in their own communities for participating in slavery. Not only that, they were kidnapping people. I mean, I think that's a given, but they were kidnapping people, and they had a kind of, it reminds me a little bit of like the Underground Railroad. They had a system, like a chain of people that they were in cahoots with, that they would pass people along this train that they kidnapped to get them to the coast, which is where the slave ports and things were. This was kind of an elaborate system because if you think about it, the Europeans could not go into a land that they were totally unfamiliar with and did not know who lived there. As far as their communities, didn't know the language, they didn't know where they were going. They had to have inside help to do that. So they built their slave ports on the coast, and then they employed Africans. And you will always have people who are willing to do wrong things for their own advantage. That is not unique to Africans. That is a part of, unfortunately, a normal part of human nature, to be selfish in that way. And so they would employ these Africans who were kidnapping people, even if they did not see them as their brothers, and forcing them into slavery. And so the slave ports were then guarded and heavily equipped to fight off any of people that would come and try to take that over. And so this was a very it was a very criminal run type of business. It was not legitimate. There was no government kingdom, I'm sorry, no African kingdom or community, established community that was wholly participating in the slave trade. As a matter of fact, again, if you were found to be a slave trader, you were ostracized from the community, sometimes attacked and things like that. And so it was not it was not a accepted practice, I should say. And so the Africans that participated in the slave trade were not selling their brothers, first of all, and then secondly, they were not selling their community members. They were going into other villages and towns and as spread throughout all of West Africa, basically kidnapping people for the profit that they gained from doing that. They had really no concept that this was something attributed to Black people, because if so, why would they participate in something that was a threat to them also? So they did not see it that way. So even with the slave trade, you can see that before that took place, that Africans traded with Europeans. There was no stigma on them because of their skin color. How would they know to even, or how would they even begin to bargain or make arrangements about the slave trade if there was not already trading happening on that coast? So before the slave trade, slave traders traded with Africans. As far as some research that I have done, they had children with African women. They were very sociable with each other, for lack of a better word. And so this thing about Black people being inferior did not exist then. This was a byproduct of trying to justify slavery. And so I hope that answers your question. I hope I gave you some information that you didn't have before. But to summarize, yes, Africans did sell each other. It's not perceived the way as said most of the time. And that it doesn't even matter, because wrong is wrong no matter who does it. So that's it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I will be more than happy to answer them. And you guys have a good day, and I'll post my next video soon. Thanks. Bye.